Today, we are covering SRED and other tax incentives for your growing business. A little bit about Enkel. Enkel provides outsourced bookkeeping, payroll, and other accounting services to businesses and nonprofit organizations. We have a head office in Vancouver and a global team of over 80 people. Since launching the company about 7 years ago, we've worked with over 300 companies across Canada. Many of our clients have been able to access SRED and some of the other incentives that you will be hearing about today. In terms of panelists today, so my name is Omar. I am the CEO and co-founder of Enkel. I'm also a CPA, CA. I have over 15 years of experience in tax and accounting. And prior to starting Enkel, I actually worked at KPMG for 8 years, where I met Jacqueline and Kristin. Jacqueline is an executive director in the tax and incentives practice at KPMG. She has over 12 years of experience in tax and advisory and SRED. Kristin Johnson is a CPA CA. She is a senior manager at KPMG, and she has specialized in Canadian tax and SRED for the past 15 years. We also have Chen, a senior consultant at KPMG who specializes in SRED claims for software and technology companies. In terms of agenda for today, we are going to start with what is SRED. Secondly, we will talk about expenditures that can be claimed for SRED. We'll then go into other funding opportunities for Canadian businesses. Fourth, we will cover how KPMG can assist you with government funding. And finally, we will have a Q&A session. I would invite you all to submit your questions as we go through today. In the bottom right corner of your screen, there is the little chat box there. You can submit your questions as we go through, and the panelists will do their very best to get to your questions. Now, without further ado, I will pass it over to the KPMG team. Oh, I think, Kristin, we can't hear you. You're on mute.
I'm muted. Hi, I'm Kristin, and as Omar introduced, I am a senior manager in the SRED practice at KPMG. KPMG, whether you are aware, is a audit and a full-service audit, tax, and consulting practice in Canada and around the world. So today we are here to talk to you about tax incentives, SRED and otherwise. So we're going to start with just a quick summary of SRED. We are kind of assuming that there's some base knowledge of what SRED is. And obviously, if there's further questions, we can answer, but this will be kind of a short summary of it so that we can get into the nitty-gritty of some other tax incentives that may be less familiar to everyone. So SRED is the first part, and that's what I will be talking about. So if you aren't aware, SRED, Scientific Research and Experimental Development, is a Canadian program that provides a tax incentive to companies that are doing research and development within Canada. It's to encourage development happening within the country. Qualifying expenditures create a tax refund or a credit to be applied against taxes payable. I assume that most of you here are what's called a CCPC, a Canadian Controlled Private Corporation, which oftentimes have a significant cash benefit of up to a 35% tax refund on costs incurred. Canada provides about $4 billion of SRED tax credits annually, with about 20,000 credits, successful claimants every year. It's filed together with your tax return. So it can be filed with your tax return up to a maximum of 18 months after your year end. And it can get, in the cases that it's not a refundable credit, it can be carried back against historical taxes up to 3 years or carried forward for up to 20 years. Basically, the nitty-gritty of what everybody wants to know is for every dollar of R&D that qualifies as SRED, there's up to 36 to 64% back on every dollar. So it could be a big benefit to companies. This is just kind of a quick summary of what can be claimed. So it is the costs incurred. So salaries and wages of people performing the work, materials involved in projects, and contractors that are hired. Sorry, go ahead, Vinay. I'll let Kevin speak to this. He's on the technical side and can speak to a little bit about what actually qualifies as SRED.
No, you're in mute.
Yeah, I'm on mute. Thank you very much. My name is Kevin Chen. My background was in software development and enterprise architecture before joining the KPMG SRED team. So this slide basically goes over like two high-level questions. Is there SRED and what is the extent? So is there SRED? I'll read this out and provide more detail and examples. It's systematic investigation or search carried out in a field of science or technology by means of experiment or analysis. And then for the extent is what type of work is involved. It involves engineering, design, operations research, mathematical analysis, computer programming, data collection, testing, and psychological research. And we also have areas that are excluded. But what does this mean exactly? So basically, if there's one takeaway you can take from this slide, it's the word experimentation and experiments. It's trying to solve a technological uncertainty or challenge, and that you have to perform experiments to find the answers to. So as an example, if you can find a solution on Google, that won't count. Or if you find a third-party product, whatever it may be, and you just have to install and configure it, then that won't count either. It's where you can't find a solution anywhere else and you have to find the solutions to your technological challenges and uncertainties on your own. We can go over details in software development. If there's any software development companies who are on this call, as an example, performance challenges. We have a lot of software companies who have to deal with the performance of their software, their systems, their enterprise architecture, as well as technological gaps in the tools or third-party code that they're using. They have to fill in those gaps somehow, and they can't find a solution. I think that's it. If we go to the next slide. Let Kristin take over.
Yeah, so back to just the basics of calculating the credit. And this is something that we really like to go over with people. We often hear from clients or potential clients, well, and we're going to get into this in a minute, well, I receive other funding, I receive provincial funding, I receive federal funding, I'm not going to be eligible for SRED, which is not always the case. So we look at SRED and we look at all of the salaries and wages. Contractors are included at only a maximum of 80%. There's a 20% deduction, what's called a third-party payment. So payments paid to university or other research institutes for the benefits of research being performed. And then, as we discussed about materials consumed or transformed, as well as an overhead, either direct overheads or there's what's called a proxy markup, should we select that way. So all the claims that we provide, we do an analysis of what's the cost preferential for each of our clients. And then we do apply any government or non-government assistance against that, or contracts paid. So in the case of a service provider, if they are being hired to do SRED, any contract payments would be applied against that. We always look at whether or not, and I say we, any provider or any individual would look at the fact that what percentage of that amount applies against the actual SRED incurred. Sometimes it is not a direct correlation, as well as in the case of creating a proxy or filing a proxy claim, which generally in the people-centric businesses of R&D is often the case, you would still benefit from that overhead markup. That goes in to create the qualified expenditures for ITCs, which then qualify for the credit of between 15 and 35% federally and 10% in BC. Other provinces vary a little bit. I think it's about, the lowest is 3% in Ontario for certain credits. There's others, but the general credit in Ontario is 3.5, and some provinces are up to 15, possibly even 17% still. I'm speaking in BC since we're located in BC, but we do have obviously the ability to look into anything more specific if you're coming from outside of BC. So overall, your R&D costs, as you can see, can be very preferential in making this claim for costs that are already incurred. I think I've pretty much already spoken to this slide, but to the fact that I said, if you're receiving other government grants, it does not mean that you are not eligible for SRED. It just means that we need to look at how those two grants, fundings, and tax credits, how they interact with each other. We would likely have the proxy. I'll move on to Jacqueline. Oh, sorry. Move here to Jacqueline, who will speak to some other funding. She's our expert in funding other than SRED.
Yeah, so good morning, afternoon, or evening to all of you, depending on where you are. But I just kind of wanted to make a few other points on the SR&ED program. So for those of you that have filed it, please feel free to ask any questions, any sort of thoughts about it, and please feel free to drop it on the chat. It is worth to note that for the SRED program, however, there is an 18-month deadline. So if you think that you are undertaking any R&D work, so any R&D work or any potential technological work, so it doesn't have to be quote unquote labeled as R&D, as you undertake the activities. But if you think you might be doing something, we could file, or you could file an SR&ED claim up to 18 months. So what that means is that, for example, if your fiscal year end of the company, if you have a fiscal year end, obviously you have incorporated and so on, once, if you have a fiscal year end of, say, December 31st, 2021, we would have up to June of 2023 to file an R&D claim. And the mechanics of that is just an amendment to your tax return for the 2021 fiscal year. So something to keep in mind, because as we talk about other funding programs, this is probably one of the, I would say, one of the 2 or 3 funding programs that is backward looking. So the government is providing some funding for you, or a refund or tax credit based on the amount that you have spent. And you can, again, go back to, you know, June or December of 2021 for June. And so if you are looking, or you think you may be having an R&D claim, then that would be something worth to note. The other thing to note on R&D is that you could have a collaboration project where somebody else is engaged in doing the R&D on your behalf, but you are doing the testing for that R&D. And so whether it's software, whether it's manufacturing, whether it's any kind of industry, we see a lot of that in ag tech, where you have the technologies obviously created by software individuals, and the actual bearer of the benefit is an agricultural facility or entity. And so in that case, you may both be able to claim an SR&ED claim, depending on the activities and whether or not those are eligible as per the program criteria. So I just wanted to make those points, because it's great to have R&D, but to know a little bit more on the ins and outs is also good. And yeah, absolutely, we can chat later about any of the specifics that you have. We have had R&D claims where you might not have expected them to be. The R&D traditionally is obviously in the space of the entity. So like I mentioned, agri or software, sort of that's your core business. And so you're developing software, hardware, and so on, or you're developing your manufacturing. But in some cases, there could be R&D where the R&D, the core of the R&D may not be the actual basis of the business or the business activity. So there's a bit to unpack there. But again, the SR&ED program is only one of the few that you can go back. Now, it is a credit and it is a refund, so you could have it as a refundable credit or a refundable amount. But just keep in mind that that refundable amount has to be recorded as income in the following year. So it's something that people don't think about when they're doing it. Just being aware of that is also interesting. And then we're going into funding now. So this slide obviously has some 4 sort of pillars of what we'd like to think about. And the takeaway of the slide is that you can get funding outside of SR&ED. So we're talking about anything else other than SR&ED at the moment. in the form of loans. So government funding loans are usually at a 0% interest rate, which is very fantastic, especially if you're trying to include a lender that has a higher percentage than that. And with interest rates right now, this is very timely. There's tax credits, so help can be in the form of loans, tax credits, wage subsidies. I'm sure most of you are aware of the wage subsidies, repayable contributions, grants, which is what most people really like. It's just, well, there's the free money, so then that's fantastic. Non-repayable conditional. The other takeaway of here is that the funding could really be at any government level. So it could be at right down from the municipal level. So your municipality, for example, the municipality of Abbotsford, Port Coquitlam, have grants, business grants specific for encouraging and attracting business to those areas. So municipal, provincial, federal are extremely active as well in these areas. And then here's some key points that I really want to hone in, and it's very important that when you're going for funding, whether it is, you come and ask us for funding or you're going looking for funding on your own, really keep these 4 things in mind. So one of them is that it's always forward-looking. Like I mentioned earlier, if you have an SR&ED claim, you can go back and amend your tax return. For most funding programs, you may be able to go back, say, a month or 2, depending on the expenditures, but most of that is really forward-looking. So if you're thinking about expanding, if you're thinking about hiring people, training people, if you're thinking about collaborating with another entity, more product development and so on, that might not fall into the SR&ED criteria, you may start to plan now to look for some funding, because it is, again, in the future. And the decisions from the various programs do take time. So even if you file, say, February 25th, you may not hear back from them until probably March, April, depending on the fund. So wage subsidies are different. Those are actually quite quick. You can hear back fairly quickly, training as well. But most of the other ones do take a little bit of time, and programs are always changing. So if you have a project, like I said, let's just take an example 6 months from now, and you're thinking about, okay, well, now I have to look, starting to look for funding now, and you have maybe a business plan, or you have an idea of the costs that are going to be related and the activities on that project, it would be good to start looking at now, because the criteria changes, the amounts of funding change, the time of the funding program being open is also changing. And the last point here is that the funding is not immediate. And what this I really mean that even if we file, March 1st, for example, for an application, and you hear back on April 1st, the funding that you receive, you will not receive it on April 1st unless there has been certain measurements completed as part of that project. And so the government will say, okay, we'll sign our agreement with government March 1st. However, the reimbursement, say if it's a grant or the loan, it won't be available to you until you commit to a certain milestone within the project. So something to think about, to really keep in mind as you go through your funding strategy. And so these are the 5 categories as we as KPMG have come up with in terms of identifying where government is sort of putting their eggs in the 5 different baskets. And this is really it. So we have noticed in the last 4 or 5 years that government has been spending on average $30 billion. Now, this $30 billion does not include the $4 billion from the SR&ED program that's separate from this. So in total it would be about 34, 35. But it is about $30 billion that the government has spent, and they have spent it as we have seen the programs and dissected them throughout the years. We've seen them really in these 5 buckets, which really means that if you have a project within these sort of 5 buckets, then there may be some potential for you to receive some funding. And so in the next slide, I have some very, some list of, the next slide, there we go. Some examples of activities that might be eligible for some funding. And so now this list is not exhaustive. So if you have a project or if you have an activity that you're thinking about that maybe not showing on here, or a specific project, there might be a possibility that there is funding for it. So as an example, you might play in all of these areas. So you may be innovating, or you may be building a new facility, and therefore you have some prototyping at the design stage, and then you're growing that a little bit more. Or if you're a sole proprietor, you're starting your testing individually, and then you're sort of building that, whether it's you're building a practice, or you're building a facility, or you're building a software shop. You may be then needing more of that capital growth, which then means that you need to hire some more individuals and train them and so on, which then means that you might be looking for some market expansion. And within all of those, then you might be able to tie in some environmental sustainable practices as well. So you could play in all the areas. You can only play in one. You could apply for 100 different funding programs. You may get all of them. You may get one. You may get none. It really is dependent on what your projects are and what the government is looking at for spending. At the moment, like we've seen, workforce advancement and environmental sustainability are really the key areas where we've seen most of the government spend. And future government or the budget in 2022 also explains that. And so this just gives you an idea of what the government is looking for at funding in this coming years. Most of these exist, so most of these programs exist. However, some other ones have been doubled funded. So the apprenticeship tax credit, for example, that received funding from the government as it was announced in the prior year. And so that really, it came in effect, I believe it was December or November of last year, and they just added more money to it. And another example, or a different example, would be the Canada Water Agency. And so this is brand new, nothing has come out yet. But what we have noticed is that when government announces these new agencies or these new areas of work, there may be some funding allocated to that. So it just stands to reason that to keep Canada's water safe, clean, and well managed, there may need some technology innovation or some innovations or sort of companies to play in that space. And so therefore, there is a possibility that some funding, grants, loans, contributions may be available through that program. And then the rest are really self-explanatory. There's more Indigenous tourism being funded. Heritage Canada is another great one because we want to get people back to work and we want to get them to also contribute in the community. And in order to do that, government is saying, you know, is there more sports programs? Is there more cultural available programs that can be fostered and completed so that communities can be built when we try to get people back to work and increase that sort of community connection and awareness. Academia, of course, there's always that academia piece. You know, even whether you're a sole proprietor, whether you're a small entity or a larger entity, it's good to know that government is also looking at that academia piece, and then they're going to be doing some fostering of that collaboration between entities and academia. So lots out there. I know that this is, yeah, no, go ahead for the next slide. There has been lots out there, but we can definitely help out. So KPMG, we have a tax incentives practice across Canada. Most of you might be aware of that. But our incentive practice across Canada is about 100, 150 people. And we're not all accountants. So my background is mechanical engineering, manufacturing. I was out and working out in this industry, and we have, I would say, probably 80 of the 100 people that work for us across Canada have different disciplines. So we do have doctors, we have nanotechnologies, chemicals, civil, and so on. So we have a number of people that are able to help out with the SR&ED claims. Out in the Western region, which is pertinent to British Columbia, we have 15 people that we cover Manitoba to British Columbia. And so that was, Kristin was alluding to the fact that, you know, the tax rates for SR&ED are different per province. And we do concentrate on the Western region because we find that individuals that are in BC would tend to then go to Alberta or even Saskatchewan sometimes. And then we can find that to be able to maximize your tax credits through SR&ED or other government funding programs. So we can help out any way you want. Happy to respond to any of the questions you may have. I think there's some questions on the chat, and obviously I haven't monitored them yet. But I think, Kristin, you were going to respond to one of the questions.
Yeah, there's a few that are in my wheelhouse here that
Yeah,
I'll let
for sure.
Jacqueline and Kevin catch up. So the first thing about the loans and the grants, are they taxable? Generally speaking, yes, they're considered income if they are preferential rate loans or if they are grants. Pretty straightforward answer. They're usually considered taxable income. If the loans are repaid, then you would have a repayment in the year that it's been repaid. But I know WIN loans are no longer loans, I believe, that are being offered, but in the past, that was a very popular program. Those were recorded as income as they were received, and then as they were repaid, they were considered to be a tax deduction. So there are some questions here about, I'm not familiar with SEBA, but I would assume, Jacqueline, it's a low rate loan and it would be taxable.
Correct.
That's, but of course, remember, that doesn't mean that it's not a benefit, because if you're getting $100,000 in a loan, you're never going to be paying $100,000 in taxes on it, as well as you should get a deduction at the time of repayment. There are some questions here about CRA. If a SRED claim gets audited, what documentation do I need to share? Do I need to share timesheets? So timesheets are something that CRA really, really likes. They are the gold standard. And if you have timesheets in an audit, you will do well. That does not mean if you don't have timesheets, you will not be able to stand up to an audit to CRA. But if you have timesheets, they will absolutely ask you for them. They'll also ask for things like, on the financial side, your T4s, copies of the GL accounts that relate to materials, et cetera, that are included, as well as technical documentation such as
design,
yeah. They'll look into your Git reports, that sort of thing on the IT side. And Jacqueline maybe could give a little bit more color about what they look at on more engineering technical side.
Yeah, they're definitely not as sophisticated, or could not be as sophisticated. But even if you had some timesheet records that that allocated that, we see in manufacturing, for example, we see travel documents. Emails are great for us as well, just because they have obviously date and time and so on. All of the test records, if you have any time records, or sorry, not time records, but time studies, any papers or documents that have a date and a time, if you do have them now. So something that we see a lot is that the document exists, but for some reason it wasn't dated. So if you are doing work now that you think might be eligible, just go back and date it as best as you can remember before you file your claim. And that also reminds you sort of to go back and look and see how much time maybe you spend on those. So it doesn't have to be, like Kristin mentioned, the gold standard is definitely those timesheets. But if you don't have it, there's definitely other forms of documentation that can be used to support the claim.
Yeah.
And then from a software perspective, there it was mentioned about Git. If you don't have any timesheets or any sort of dated emails, I mean, what we've done before is we've taken version control history and calculated a proportion of what was SRED and what was not based on the total number of entries in the version control of the software.
Yeah. So, like we said, it's a gold standard, but there's always a way to build support without that. And similar to that, when we appeal a reassess, or what's the best way to appeal a reassessment that's come back way lower than claimed amount? So when you have a reassessment, I'm assuming this is in the situation of the claim has been audited. I don't know why else assessment would come back differently. You can either do an administrative review if you don't think you've received due process during your audit, or an appeal can be made within 90 days. You submit a form summarizing why you are appealing. And then I have been on maternity leave, so I'm not sure the turnaround for appeals right now because I haven't done one in several years, but it's a long process. The last I did it, I think it was usually about 2 years that it took to appeal.
Yeah, I wonder if we could maybe just quickly go through very quickly here. I'm just looking at the time. Okay, we have some time. So just quickly about what happens after you submit your file. So once you submit the file to CRA, there's a few things that can happen. And like Kristin said, things have changed as far as the audit procedures and what CRA is looking for. But what you could get is, if it is your first time filing an SR&ED claim, you might get what is called a first time claimant advisory service call. And what that is CRA will call you and they'll say, hey, this is CRA. We're calling about your SRED claim. we noticed you're a first-time claimant. We'd like to have a call and a conference call with you. And traditionally, there have been conference calls, obviously with COVID as well. So it's a Teams. They get you to sign confidentiality agreement, making sure that everybody's on board with having a call over Teams, because you are sharing some of your confidential information. So, but that call, unfortunately, does have to happen for your claim to be completed and assessed as filed. And the call is an hour, maybe an hour and a half long, and it just allows the CRA to sort of tell you, hey, this is CRA, this is what the program is, tell us a little bit about you. And it is, I mean, this is tax credits, tax dollars that the government is getting from us. So we're paying for all of this. So they want to make sure that they have some due diligence as part of the process. And so that may be what might occur, that you have a first-time claimant advisory service. Again, it's not an audit, but they will ask you specific questions as to, so how are you doing your documentation? How did you come to know about the SRED program? Why are you filing? Let's have a look at your records and so on. But again, they will not make a determination as part of an audit. The other thing that could occur is that you do have an audit, and that would be a 3.5 to 4 hour meeting where CRA will come in, and if you have, depending on the amount of projects, you can have one project, you can have 5, you can have 6, 25, 28, whatever number of projects. They will choose 2 or 3 projects. Obviously, we have more than one. They will choose those projects to then go into them in a lot more detail. And so they may have some issues surrounding the uncertainty of the work, or the work conducted, or the evidence behind the claim. They will note all of that on the agenda, and then they will come prepared. You will see the agenda as well, but that could be sort of the next thing that could happen. Again, as part of that audit, the questions that you will be responding to are very specific questions from that auditor. Throughout all this process, KPMG can help you. So we can help you sort of with the entire SR&ED claim. So we can help with both the financial and the technical, only the technical, only the financial. We can help review. We can help put it all together. We really, it just depending on what you need from us to do. And then if there is an audit, we help you with that communication with CRA as well. So, or it could be that you're preparing it on your own. You're coming up with an audit now, and you're like, geez, I have no idea. Like, I don't know what to do. Can you help? So we can definitely be engaged as part of just the audit, where we discuss with the actual auditors. We have a lot of experience, and we have probably seen all of the auditors, the older auditors at CRA as part of our program. They are hiring a significant amount of auditors, both on the financial and the technical side in the last little bit. But we can help you with that whole process on the audit. Now, after the audit is done, there could be some adjustments. There could be some things that they say, well, you know, yeah, this is very reasonable. We disagree with that one. If, say, you both disagree, then what Kristin was saying is you could go then the next step to a due process review, which really just says, did everybody follow the process? Yes or no? And then from then, you can go to a notice of objection. And so then that notice of objection does have to have a little bit of legalese behind it. Again, we can help with that. We do have our KLO, that is called, that is able to put together those letters that go back to CRA, because now you're dealing with a different department that you were dealing with originally with the audit. And so that's something important to note, that if you have had an audit and you're not in agreement with what the audit results were, you do have some steps to go back to them. I would suggest speaking with your auditor first, for sure, as a first step. Kristin, did you have some?
Yeah, I was just going to say, in the case of when you are in an audit too, one of the things is, so an appeal has to be filed within 90 days of the assessment. So generally speaking, you will get, in the case of an audit, you will get proposed audit figures. And if there's things to continue discussion on and you don't want to go in the direction of an appeal, it's still open until you receive that reassessment. So there's still discussion and information that can be provided, et cetera, until that file is closed. So that's something to always consider too, because, and I guess there's not nuance within the question, so I don't know all of the facts, but usually the reassessment would not be a surprise. And if it is a surprise, then that would definitely be a consideration, that you would want to get more information. but if it is closed, you have 90 days to appeal.
Yeah.
Let's move on here. Does KPMG offer only SR&ED accounting services, technical parts we've filled out? Yeah, we run the gamut of what assistance we provide our clients. So we do from the full meal deal, where we help with the write-up and the gathering the information from your systems and writing the projects and going into your accounting systems, to just reading over your numbers and projects and inputting them into the tax return, and anywhere in between. So if you come from a team that is very technically savvy or technologically savvy, and you don't have the background on doing the numbers, or vice versa, we definitely can assist with that, and the engagement would represent the help needed. There's also a question about costs. It's really hard for us to give you any sort of an estimate of what anything would cost, because we offer so many different services. We do operate in different ways. I can give it a little bit of an idea of that. So we do, a lot of our clients, we work on a contingent basis because it's mutually beneficial. If you earn ITCs, your fee is based on what you earn, as well as we do. As well
just a
as
point on the contingent, sorry, just a point on the contingent. So that means that for those of you that are not familiar with contingent fees, that just means that you don't pay us until you actually receive the ITC.
Right. And it's based on the ITC earned. So a rate of a certain rate applied against it. I don't want to give any numbers because we don't know what we're talking about, but it's consistent with across the market, basically. As well as we do, on a case where we're just doing a review and input, or working with your accountant to input, we can do it on an hourly basis. We do flat fee. I mean, the arrangements are very specifically tailored to the work that we're performing. So it should be mutually agreed on between the companies before.
And I will say that the first time, like if you think you have SR&ED, but you're not sure, if you think you might want to pursue some other funding as well, a call is free. Yeah. So don't hesitate to reach out. Our information is on the screen there, but just call us and let us know. We really want to make that investment, and we're happy to just chat with anyone about the potential of an SR&ED claim, or maybe not. Maybe there isn't anything there, but at least you get a little bit more understanding of what we might be looking for.
Yep. And I just said, can you help with a corporate tax file? Yeah, I mean, that's something that our firm does as well, whether it's within our group or we would do it with colleagues in another group, but we absolutely can be involved in managing your tax filing as well. I think there was a slide earlier that says, we work with Enkel often. We work with the other big four firms. We work with all of the accounting firms in town to integrate SR&ED into tax returns. We have a good relationship with people to do that. We don't need to have we don't need to be your tax filer in order to assist you with your SR&ED filing. We're very happy to work with other firms. We're also very happy to help you with other tax work. So just something for you to know.
The last thing that I want to note is we do hear a lot from entities or companies where they have been approached by these bridge financing entities. And so just a note for SR&ED specifically. And so the way that those firms work is that they provide some funding or a loan up to when you receive your SR&ED claim refund, and they have a percentage that they claim. So those companies don't help you with your SR&ED claim. They just help you potentially access some bridge financing between the time that you file SR&ED and the time that you actually receive your refund. What this means is that they then need to go with someone that is preparing the claim, such as us, to get a level of comfort of the technology and the reasonability of receiving that refund. And so we also work with those entities, where if you are sourcing that, and there's a few in town and across Canada there's a lot, but we do work with them to just make sure that we're all on the same page of the potential reasonability of receiving your refund.
Okay. is that it for questions? I think just scanning the questions here, it does look like we've covered things for the most part.
Yeah.
There is a question about contact information. The contact information is up on the screen right now for Jacqueline, Kristin, and Kevin, so feel free to take that down.
I think there was a question about the slides, if they're going to be shared. I believe, Omar, are those going to be shared with the...
Yeah, so the whole presentation actually will be shared, and of course the slides are available through there.
Oh, one last one. What about Calgary? Yep. So we can help in, like I mentioned, in any of the provinces with any of the programs that are out there. Alberta has a significant amount of funding coming out right now because they're really trying to sort of help with that oil and gas economy disruption, and Ontario. So the provinces that are big on funding are Ontario, Alberta, and British Columbia. So yeah, so happy to help out with that. Yeah, I think that's it for them.
Great. Well, thank you very much, KPMG panelists, Jacqueline, Kristin, and Kevin. It was a very informative session. We really appreciate you taking the time to share your knowledge. Please look out for the recording of this webinar. We will be emailing that out to everybody. And also feel free to reach out to any of the panelists. As I mentioned, contact information is on the screen, or to us at Enkel, and we can put you in contact with the KPMG team. Thank you all very much for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you again soon, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.